Tonight, I've come out here to do a component tasting with you. Traditionally, component tastings are conducted on the basis of aromatics. So what they'll have is some fruit or some flowers or some spice that you smell, and then smell wine and identify components of the wine from that. And that's important, but unfortunately people have very different thresholds of perception for smells. So it's hard to kind of quantify that in a way that people can use effectively. One thing we all have, though, is the ability to taste the broader differences in flavors, such as tannin, acid, oak, alcohol, and sugar. And that's the components we're going to be dissecting today. The procedure for tonight is that we are going to taste each of these components, and in order, what we'll do is we'll taste the wine, and we'll talk about what the flavors are that we perceive. We're then going to taste the component and very quickly taste the wine again. And what we're working to accomplish here is the component that we'll be tasting will overload your taste buds. It will suppress your ability to perceive that compound for a few seconds. So then you taste the wine very quickly, and you're effectively tasting it as though we've removed the acid. You'll be tasting it as though we've removed the alcohol. So you'll be able to tell what influence that component has on the overall balance of the wine. Okay, so the first thing we're going to try is acid. Acid has a funny connotation in cooking and in flavors. When you say something tastes acidic, most people mean that as a negative. And that's not what we're talking about. We want to talk about the actual interaction of acid in the wine. There are three principal acids in wine. There's tartaric, malic, and citric. Tartaric acid has a very neutral flavor. It's almost impossible to identify it because it just tastes sour. It's not colored by any other flavor perception. Malic acid tastes like green apples. Doesn't smell like them, but it's the principal fruit acid in sour apples and in crab apples and in underripe apples. And citric acid is lemon lime. And so when you taste that, there's a very distinct component of that citrus fruit character. But tartaric comprises the bulk of the acidity in grapes. Acid balances sweetness. And I always say that wine is a dynamic beverage, much like lemonade. If you just had water with sugar in it, it's bland and unpleasant. It's no fun to drink. If you just have water with acid in it, it's sour and tart, and again, not pleasant to drink. But water, lemon juice, and sugar together form a dynamic balance, with the acid and the sugar balancing off to give a rounded, full-flavored beverage. Tartness and acidic are the same thing. I would have to say that tartness characterizes a value judgment, whereas acidic characterizes a level. So if something tastes tart, less tart or more tart, then you're saying it's got a characteristic of tartness, which is acidity filtered through human perception. Whereas if something is acidic, that just means it has lots of acid in it, so it's less sort of a judgment thing. Acid also offsets fruitiness. If you take all of the acid out of fruit juice, it suddenly tastes very fruity and not really pleasant. It's too soft and gloopy tasting. With a decent amount of acidity in there, a fruit juice tastes crisp and refreshing. So it helps balance fruit character. Acid also gives backbone to white wines. A white wine without acidity, again, it doesn't taste very serious. It tastes more like a fruit beverage that's gone wrong somehow. And acid plays a crucial role in longevity in white wines. As the acid level goes up, the pH goes down. Lower pH means that bacteria can't grow. It suppresses the growth of bacteria. It also suppresses certain types of oxidation, enzymatic oxidation. So high acidity helps keep wines lasting, white wines specifically, lasting much, much longer. And wines like ice wine or the German Trockenbeeren Auslesen wines, which have startlingly high levels of acidity, but also concomitantly high levels of sugar, those wines can age for 40, 50, 60 years easily. I specify these two wines, and sorry if you've been tricked into tasting this, because they're cheap and kind of nasty. The Monkey Bay Sauvignon Blanc is an obvious tasting wine with very broad fruit flavors and a high acidity, and a couple of other tricks to it that I'll explain as we go along. And the Yellowtail Shiraz is frankly so awful that it was banned for sale in Australia until about 3 years ago, where they make it. Too many chemicals and things, too manipulated. So I chose them though for very specific reasons to deal with how they're going to relate with these components. So let's go ahead and grab the white wine, pick it up, and just have a smell first. There is absolutely no mistaking New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. It smells grapefruity. I mean, you can almost smell the sour in it, right? It's just tart and gooseberries, if you've ever smelled gooseberries there and there, and also some vegetal notes like canned asparagus or canned green beans. Yummy. So go ahead and have a little sip. And think about what you're tasting. There is sweet fruit right on the palate, and a broad spectrum of sort of citrus, grapefruit things going on. And then it becomes more tart after you swallow it. Does everyone get that? Yeah. More or less? Yeah. Okay, now keep this wine in your right hand and pick up the acid in your left. You want to take a small sip of the acid. You do not need a lot. We're talking 2 teaspoons tops. Swirl it around your mouth, swallow it, and then taste the wine again and think about what you're tasting compared to the wine that you tasted a few moments ago. Okay, so let's give this a shot. Sour wine. That wine is vastly sweeter than it was just a moment ago. It also seems to have a little less structure. This is where the suppression part comes in. That wine didn't get any sweeter. All we did was suppress your taste buds' ability to perceive acidity for a moment. So we can say that it's fairly obvious that this wine has a high acid level. And in fact, it's over 8%. It's about 8.5% to 9% total. The reason for this is the way they make modern New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is they pick the grapes vastly underripe. They pick them when they're at probably about 18 to 19 degrees Brix, which isn't sufficient to make a balanced wine. It doesn't have enough sugar to go beyond about 10% or 10.5% alcohol. But when they pick them overripe, these particular grapes have a retained aroma of underripe grapefruits and that green bean asparagus thing going on, which is what New Zealand wines are famous for. They make up the alcohol content by shoveling white sugar into the fermenting vats, just enormous amounts of chaptalization to drive the alcohol while retaining those methoxypyrazine flavors, which are the green underripe characters. So you can have a sip of water if you want to just clarify your palate a little. And the next thing we want to do is grab the red wine and just first off have a sniff. The first thing I smell is an oak character that's almost like caramel. You smell caramel syrup, like cooked sugar. Doesn't smell terribly sophisticated, but I also smell red fruit, sort of maybe plums or maybe some berries in there. It's not very focused, so let's just have a little sip. First thing I get is vanilla and oak, and very quickly followed by sweet, cooked jammy red fruit, followed by a kind of there's a tannin character in the palate that I find irritating, not in a pain sense, but kind of like it's sticking with me, and not in a great way. So let's grab the acid again, and let's first, again, just a small sip, work it all over, and wine. That wine tastes sugary sweet now, doesn't it? So what I garnered from that is the sweetness level went from quite sweet to sugary sweet. So that means there's some acid in there, but it's probably not to the level that it was in the Sauvignon Blanc. The acidity is probably a bit lower because it was so completely wiped out by our moderately acidic solution. So there's acids playing a role in there, but on the other hand, it didn't seem to fall apart and get quite as floppy as the white wine did. So acid is playing a much more important role in the white than it is in the red. Now tannin, when we say the word tannin, what we actually mean is one of over 40,000 identified polyphenolic compounds. Tannin covers just this insanely broad range of different chemical compounds. Tannins are astringent and bitter, and there's two different things at play here. Really good tannins in a red wine give a velvety, soft mouth feel, and that's an astringency. And astringency is a little difficult to describe, but it's like if you're drinking straight black tea that's not too strong, and after you drink it, your mouth feels a little bit dry. That's the astringency and the tannins drying out the mucous membranes in your mouth. The tannins help balance fruit, and they're most predominant in red wine. You don't find as many of them in white because tannins are found in the skin of the grapes. Half the tannin is in the skin, the other half the tannin is in the seeds. And white wines are crushed and pressed and the juices run off immediately. Red wines are crushed and the pulp is left in contact with the skin and the seeds. As the alcohol fermentation proceeds and consumes the sugar in the pulp, it extracts the tannins from the skins and begins to extract the tannins from the seeds. Seed tannins tend to be more bitter than skin tannins. Skin tannins tend to be more astringent and softer. So you don't get as many in whites, but let's test that out. First up, let's grab our white wine in one hand and grab our tannin in the other. Again, take a sip of the white, a sip and a small sip of the tannin. It is quite bitter. So sip of the white, sip of the tannin, and a sip of the white. Other than the tannin solution being quite unpleasant, white doesn't change. I noticed a little bit of a change in that it seemed a little softer and the fruit seemed a little more focused. But the wine itself didn't change radically the way it did when we drank the acid solution. The theory is we are suppressing the perception of that compound by overloading our taste buds. That white wine has virtually no tannin in it. It's got almost nothing. Let's try the red. That wine seems totally bland. The fruit is way out there. And that bitterness that we saw in the finish earlier, the one you related to tea bags, that bitterness in the finish is gone. It's completely disappeared. And this wine, to me, tastes a little bit more like really severely watered down grape jelly as opposed to wine that I would drink. So obviously, there is a ton more tannin in there than there was in the white wine. So in terms of balancing the fruit, that wine now has unbalanced levels of fruit. The astringency is way down, the bitterness is down. So tannin is a crucial balancing agent to the fruit character and the perceived sweetness of that wine. Acid does that job in the white. Let's move on to oak. The reason why we have oak in wine is because they started storing wine in barrels. And the very first barrels we think people used were the ones that the Gallic peoples in northern France used for transporting and storing all of their goods. And so these Gauls had been doing it for hundreds of years. The Romans came and invaded what is now today modern France, and they saw this new technology they'd never seen before, barrels, and they were knocked out. Watertight, strong, light, they floated. Years and years passed, and people became used to the flavor of oak in their wines. So almost all red wines of quality and character get oak character added to them, either through barrel storage or through just chips and cubes and sawdust added to the fermentation. So let's grab the white wine solution. And again, let's go through it same way. A little sip of the white wine. Sniff of the oak. What do you smell? I smell bookcases. Old book, wood shop. My great uncle's wood shop where he was turning oak staves in a lathe. I also smell, it almost smells dusty. It smells dry to me. Are there like a dry library or something like that? Let's go ahead and have a sip. Astringent, vanilla-y, caramel and white wine. It's not pleasant, but on the other hand, the white wine doesn't seem any less oaky. So there's no oak in that. It's not balancing anything. What happened in this case was not the oak didn't just suppress on our palate. What happened was it was still there, and the white wine wasn't being suppressed by anything. So we had an admixture of oak character in this white wine, and it's totally inappropriate. It really made it taste quite awful. So there's absolutely no oak present in that wine. Let's try it again with the red. Now that's really weird. Sudden, more plummy, raspberry, the fruit popped out. Why did the fruit pop out? Because we had suppressed our ability to smell vanillins and taste vanilla, guaiacol, and certain sugars. Toasted oak develops a lot of sugariness to it. It's roasted out of the woods. It's certain wood compounds that when they cook, they make like sugar, like caramelized or brown sugar. So obviously, a big part of that wine's character is coming from oak, because suddenly that fruit seemed much more focused. It seemed way less flabby and way less sort of floppy and indistinct. So I got the plums, I got the raspberries as well. It seemed a little bit crisper. So this wine has a bucket load of oak added to it. So you're tasting the vanillins, which are the vanilla-like compounds found in oak when you toast it. Guaiacol, which is smoke or smoky, toasty kind of an aroma, and tannin. There's quite a bit of tannin that comes from the oak itself, because oak tannins, or ellagic tannins as they're known chemically, provide part of the structure of that wine. But the white, no tannin there, just kind of goofed it up. So let's talk about alcohol. What does alcohol taste like? Can anyone tell me what alcohol tastes like? Sweet, that's very good. A lot of people think alcohol tastes hot. Hot is trigeminal sense, and that doesn't kick in until an alcohol solution is above 18%. So up to about 18%, you can't taste the heat or the burning power of alcohol. That's why people drink vodka mixed with fruit juice to disguise the burning. And when you dilute it below 18%, your typical cocktail is about less than 20% alcohol. You can't get that flavor. So that's why people have for years been making cocktails to dilute the alcohol content so you get an acceptable flavor balance. Now, what alcohol tastes like is delicious booze. The trigeminal sense doesn't kick in, and you perceive sweetness. So let's just grab that alcohol thing and have a taste. It's like slightly sweetened water. If no one had told you you were drinking alcohol, you would have a very tough time telling that this was some cheap arse vodka dissolved in water, because there's no heat, there's no burning, but the sweetness is on the sides of the tongue and palate. Go ahead and take another tiny sip. When you taste it, that is not on the tip of the tongue sweetness. So let's just go grab that sugar solution, and don't mix them up, but grab the sugar solution and taste that. It's sweet, but it is a very different sweetness. It's, number one, it's a cleaner sweetness. It's more immediately perceivable, and it starts on the front of the tongue and seems to stay at the front of the mouth. So alcohol and sugar have very different sweetness profiles, but both are important to the flavor of wine. And let's grab the white wine and the alcohol. Teeny little sip of the white wine, taste the alcohol. That wine is much drier. I perceived the acidity to be higher, and it almost had a bitterness in the finish. Therefore, the alcohol in that wine is playing a crucial role to its flavor perception. Whereas before, the fruit seemed really to start off really sweet and then kind of finish a little tartar in the end. When we suppressed the alcohol flavor by drinking that alcohol first, what we got was a much drier, almost astringent white wine. Let's try this again with the red. That wine suddenly seems vastly more sophisticated. Drier, leaner, more elegant. I get a flavor finish that's like violets. Violets in the tongue. That's actually surprising how much better that is. That's got a high alcohol content, and because the high alcohol content isn't because of sugar like it is in the Sauvignon Blanc. The high alcohol content from that is because the grapes came from Central Australia, where it is stinking hot and there's not enough water for irrigation. So about half of the grapes turned into raisins in the vine. So they had extremely high sugar levels, and that high sugar level fermented out into a high alcohol level. And when we suppress the alcohol, suddenly the wine seems more focused. If they had the ability to reduce the alcohol on this by about 2%, it would taste a ton better. I would probably not turn my nose up at a glass of that in a restaurant. So what are we getting out of that? Alcohol helps balance the acidity in the white wine, because the sweetness helps take that initial tartness down, as we noticed when we tasted it before and tasted it after the alcohol. It helps also balance the tannins. And in this case, against the red wine, when we took the alcohol out of when we suppressed the alcohol, suddenly the tannins seemed to be leaner and more elegant, and the fruit seemed to jump up a little, but it was elegant fruit. What are we gonna take away from this? Do I like lower alcohol wines if I like tart wines? Actually, probably. A lot of Germanic white wines that are sold under the QBA of Cabernet or the very low alcohol levels, they will have decent acidity, and they might have a bit of residual sugar, but the decent acidity will always be there. It'll be crisp. When they're at much higher alcohol levels, they tend to have been hung until they're quite ripe, and the longer a white grape hangs, the more the acids drop as it ripens physiologically. So lower alcohol wines, yeah, they're going to be a little tartar on the main. But you're going to have to look for them. It's not going to be true of absolutely everything. Let's move on to the last one, sugar. So we've already tasted the sugar, and we know that it attacks the front of the palate and the tip of the tongue. So let's grab our white, grab our sugar. That's super sour. Now, what does that tell us? If we suppressed sugar, and this is a dry white wine, why does it suddenly taste so insanely tart? Because it's loaded with sugar. It's absolutely as sweet as a 2 on the sweetness scale. And here's the deal. Sugar is kind of like the winemaker's cheat. It's the winemaker's duct tape. You can hold together a terrible wine by dosing it with a bunch of sugar. One of the fastest selling Chardonnays in North America is Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. It's a medium price point. Lots of people like it. The dirty secret is it's almost 2% residual sugar. It's almost a 2 on the sweetness scale. And they don't have to advertise that because it's one of those things where winemakers are allowed to fudge. They can sell it as 0% residual sugar under the law, but they add enough sugar back into it to make sure that it's very, very sweet, and that sweetness is hidden under oak, under fruit, and under acid. Let's try that with the red. Now that's tangy. That also has a significant amount of residual sugar. Once again, it's a winemaker's trick. Fire sugar in, people love it. So in addition to having the fruit occluded and blocked by alcohol, there's also a significant amount of sugar in there. And what both of these wines illustrate is in modern winemaking, the levels have been turned up. 25, 30 years ago, most of the wines that we were exposed to were in the European or French style. They would have lower levels of alcohol, 11.5%, maybe 12%, and they would be very, very dry. Reds would be extremely dry, whites would be quite dry, and only sweet wines would have any residual sweetness. The modern high ripeness style of wines coming out of California and Australia and the New World emphasizes extreme physiological ripeness, residual sugar, and high levels of fruit. So these are two wines that really exemplify that. They are turned up to 11. That brings us to what is wine. So white wine is a solution, again, we go back to the beginnings. It's mostly water. Wine is comprised almost entirely of water. Second component is alcohol, which provides a sweetness, but it's not a sugar sweetness. Then we have acidity as the third most important flavor compound, followed by sugar and residual sugar, and then all the associated flavors of fruit that come out in it. Reds are a bit different. Water and alcohol are the first two, just as in white wine, but tannin plays a huge role. Tannin plays the balancing role that acid does in white wines. After that, we have oak, if there's any added. That plays, again, a huge balancing role because the oak provides its own sense of tannins, plus those cooked vanillins, guanicols, and sugary compounds. After that, it's any residual sweetness or sugar from the must, and then the associated flavors. So while they are two very distinct things, they have same structures for their flavor profiles. Does that make sense to everybody? So the next time you go out and taste a red or a white wine, what I want you to do, and it's not a requirement to take in this seminar, but I want you to stop, take that taste and swallow and analyze. Did I taste sweetness in the front of my tongue, or was it more in the sides? Am I getting sugar or alcohol? Well, after I've finished, does it become tart and sour, or does it become dry and astringent? Is there a vanilla or a toasty or a smoky compound? Am I getting oak out of this wine? And after I've swallowed everything, what happens next? Where does this wine want to take me in terms of its flavor and its length? Okay? And you can concentrate on the aromatics, and that's the study of a lifetime. I've been drinking wine now for 27 years, and I still learn something new every time I taste a wine. There's something new to be found and discovered in the aromas and smells. But the structure always remains the same. There are these basic 5 components that form the backbone of every wine that we taste. So once you get that lined up in your mind, then the associated flavors and aromas, all those things over the top, can fall into place as accoutrements and garnishes for those 5 basic compounds.